Hey, have you heard? The J. Brown Yoga live stream subscription has been upgraded to a two-way interactive experience. I've been talking about it recently, and I'm mentioning it again now for two reasons. One, it's by far the best use of technology for sharing yoga that I've discovered. I'm having practices with people all over the world, alongside people right here with me in my hometown. People are meeting each other and becoming friends as though they're going to the same yoga class together, even though they're in different places in the world. It is truly amazing. And there's 4 classes a week. If you can't make it there live, there's always a class available 24/7. It really is an opportunity for anyone in the world to practice in the approach that I'm so passionate about. And the second reason I'm mentioning it is that starting September 1st, along with the upgrade, the monthly rate is going up. But if you subscribe now, you can lock in the current rate indefinitely, which is 20% less. So if it's something that you've been considering in the past, or maybe you're just finding out about it right now, this is a really good time to check it out. It's the J. Brown Yoga live stream subscription. You can find it at jbrownyoga.com. All right, here we are. Is everyone ready? Are you situated? This is J. Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is J. Brown. Welcome and thank you. I'm very appreciative that you're choosing to listen. My guest today is Frederick Newbill III, and I will tell you about Frederick in just a little bit. But first, I feel like I want to say something about a subject that is for sure to get me into trouble. Because I want to say something about the political situation in my country. And I have been avoiding making even the slightest bit of comment on this subject because the last time I did, I made what I thought was a totally innocuous comment about how I was feeling. I didn't express opinions about others. I just specifically talked about how I was feeling, and I still got emails from disgruntled listeners asking me why I was alienating them and telling me that I had just lost them as a listener. So I've been really avoiding it. And I think we often avoid political discussions in the yoga world, maybe because there is sort of a divisive context in which politics is happening and is usually happening because there's an adversarial element to political discourse. It's sort of the nature of it. And in the yoga world, we're trying to all come together and be one, right? There's unity in yoga. So when we talk about politics, it doesn't always feel very yogic. And I was just talking about this with my fellow teachers in my weekly teachers class this week. And one of my friends there, she was asking me very earnestly about this because she and I and my fellow teachers in this group, we've had conversations about yoga philosophy, and I've expressed my views about non-duality as our given natural state and how the seeming duality around us is what we're undoing in practice so that we can reside more freely in the non-dual reality that we are. And that consideration of the nature of our being, it has a certain frequency to it. It has a certain quality to it that's very in line with, I think, what we often experience when we do simple breathing and moving exercises. But when I start talking about politics, suddenly there's a different frequency to that, right? There's a feeling of disunion that happens around that. And my friend was asking me, where's the non-duality in the political discourse? And it's a very good question. I've been thinking a lot about it because I truly believe that teaching people simple breathing and moving exercises that afford them the possibility to experience themselves as the non-dual reality that we are it does affect politics, whether that person's like politically active or not. Even just from like a morphic resonance standpoint, I do believe that we will affect culture and ultimately our politics in that subtle way through yoga practice. However, I don't think that's enough. I think if we're choosing to live in the world, then we are also choosing to operate under certain conditions. As led by misperceptions as they may be, we're still operating within that. And I don't see my understanding of our non-dual reality as being at odds with engaging in that conversation. And frankly, I had a conversation last week with a friend who I really respect, who's really smart, who I felt like was being hoodwinked by the media. There really is fake news. There's fake news out there. And I'm sorry to say this. I'm sure there's like my liberal friends out there are going to get upset, but I think MSNBC is a problem. I think Fox is more of a problem, but MSNBC is a problem. I'm not getting accurate news from MSNBC. I can't even really watch it right now. I'm getting more accurate news from independent people on YouTube than you do on MSNBC. And it's because there is a neoliberal progressive veneer that myself and I'm sure many other people listening have bought into at some time in our lives. I certainly did. I felt very inspired by Barack Obama, the man. But when I look back at his administration, I feel like I got gypped. I feel like it was a bait and switch. None of those bankers went to jail after they fleeced all of us in that financial crisis. We never got any public option to compete with private insurance to show whether or not it would work and whether or not we could do it better and for less. We didn't get any of that. I just feel like the people who are supposed to be representing us to fight for the progressive ideas that I support, as far as I can tell, they are bought by the same corporate interests as the people on the other side of the aisle. And there's a few people, and I'm just going to name names, Bernie and Tulsi and Warren maybe, I'm not sure, but seems like it. These people seem to me to actually be trying to challenge the power structures. And it is unbelievable what's happening to them. Like the attacks against Tulsi Gabbard are unbelievable. And please don't email me and saying something about her being an Assad apologist. Please don't do that. Please don't do it. Educate yourself. It's people like Tulsi and Bernie who are not taking PAC money and are actually trying to see if they can challenge the entrenched power structures. And what I see happening there is sort of what sometimes pisses me off about the yoga world the same. I'm often talking about this, like the micro and the macro. Like there's some issues that we're all aware about, but we're not really going to address them because there's sort of a status quo, an industry market standard that we just have to accept that we can't change. So we're just going to have to work within that system, you know. And to some degree we can. We can work within the system. We can change culture even within the structure that we're in. But at some point, the structural elements are overpowering and you have to address them, I think, in some way. And I don't have any solutions, but I certainly know that sticking to some kind of status quo thing isn't working. And it seems to me that at the heart of the problem is who's paying who. It's like, where's the money influence and how is that dictating policy that's affecting all of us? So I don't know. I'm probably pissing people off. Maybe people are like, why is Jay talking about this? What the fuck does he know about politics? But I think we are at a pivotal time. And I don't want us to lose sight of the important thing at hand here. And there's plenty of influences and media outlets that are trying to do that. They're trying to obscure the real situation. So I'm just encouraging everybody to not limit your news consumption to MSNBC or Fox or CNN. Go on YouTube and do some search and go to these alternative outlets, because frankly, they're giving perspectives that you're not going to get on those big stations, which are paid for by the same corporate interests. So, oh, there you go. You can hear, right? See, it doesn't sound very non-dual of me, does it? But I really do think that it's important for us to be educated, to make informed choices, and to participate in whatever way makes sense to us. And since me having this show and spouting off like this, sometimes people are listening to that, I feel compelled to say something. So, for whatever that's worth, it's not a bad place to mention today's guest, Frederick Newbill III. Because the reason Frederick is here has to do with who he is and how his life experiences represent an intersection of many conversations that have been happening on this show, and I think are happening in our larger societies as well. Frederick is a podcast listener, and he heard me talking about race, and he heard me talking about lineage and tradition in yoga and a couple other threads, and he emailed me and said, hey, I think I might be in an interesting position to speak on these matters just because of who he is and where he was born and his interests. I'm being vague because I don't want to give away too much, but just to say this is one of those moments where a podcast listener just like you chose to email me and share something about themselves with me, which I'm always encouraging you to do because I love it. And every once in a while, one particular email jumps out at me at a particular moment and seems to be fitting in to the other conversations and to where my head's at. And I email them back and say, hey, let's record a talk. And so that's what this is today. And I think you'll see Frederick does intersect a lot of different things, and I enjoyed meeting him and hearing his perspective. I'm excited for you to hear it today. Before we do, let me just quickly mention I got a couple of gigs coming up. On September 28th, I'm going to be at the Central PA Yoga Love Fest, and on October 5th and 6th, I'm going to be at the Yogi Underground in Falls Church, Virginia. You can find out about those gigs and more, and register for my live stream subscription before the end of the month to lock in the current rate, and find out about all of my stuff at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, I think that's fine. I'm going to touch base with you on the other side. I'm going to tell you about who's coming on next week and maybe make a few more comments about this or that. But for now, let's go ahead and do it. Let's listen to this conversation that I had with Frederick Newbill III.
Hello.
Hello, is this Frederick?
Yes, it is. Is this Jay?
This is. Is it Frederick or is it Fred, or how do you like to be addressed?
I like Frederick.
Frederick.
I'm the third, so I've always tried to differentiate myself from my father and grandfather, and whenever I hear Fred, I think about them.
Ah, interesting. That's interesting that you say that right off the bat like that. But first, just hello, and cool to meet you and talk to you, my friend.
Yeah, likewise. It's exciting to talk to you. I really respect the space that you hold, and the conversations you've been having are inspiring. So it's a pleasure.
I appreciate that, and I have to say, just for everybody listening, so we can clue them into why this conversation is happening, and maybe for you a little bit why I chose to email you and invite you to talk to me, because I felt like there's all these different threads that have emerged over the years of doing the show, and there's these intersections between these different conversations that sometimes are happening in this space. And you seemed to recognize, and you wrote it in your email, that intersection seems to live in you as well. like a similar intersection that's happening here on this show is also happening in you. And I found that very intriguing.
Yeah.
So also, I have to say, first off the bat, I'm very intrigued because you have a very soft digital footprint. Like there's very little about you online. And I'm used to that when it's somebody who's older than me, but you're like a generation or two younger than me and you have such little internet presence. What's that about? Did you used to have one and you deleted it, or did you never have one? Or I just assumed someone of your age would also have an Instagram account.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had a sort of bipolar relationship with social media. And it's something actually I think I've heard you talk about recently as well, as kind of being off of it. And yeah, I'm proud to say that I no longer have a Facebook. I no longer have an Instagram, but I did have both of those things. And I think for me, just the time that I found myself sort of mindlessly scrolling, as well as the ego trips I would go into about self-presentation and like my not good enough stuff, and just not a healthy thing. And it feels really freeing to not be sort of addicted to the screen and always worried about what my next post is going to say. And it feels good to be free from it. But I do find myself sort of fear of missing out sometimes when I want to kind of know what's going on with people or things. And so I'll kind of Google and find my way onto some social media pages. But yeah, no digital footprint, very light digital footprint.
Well, it's just like a LinkedIn and like a academia edu. That's all you got.
Yeah, that's it, man.
Well, you went one step farther than me because you deleted everything. Like I'm still up there. I'm just not doing anything.
Gotcha.
I do still go on to look for the same reason that you suggest. Like I don't want to miss out on stuff. And I do pick up on stuff. There is sometimes threads that are sort of somewhat important, I feel, given the position I'm in and wanting to be in the conversations, but I have to say it's not as much as it used to be, and more it's not as important to be on there, and I respect people's choices to get off. But it does, I guess, pose a challenge, though, especially if you're trying to, make your way in a independent, creative profession, maybe like yoga teaching. Sometimes there's not always a lot of avenues, so you feel like you got to or something. Yeah. This notion of sort of independently trying to do it too has been really present with me. I am an aspiring academic. I'm no scholarly heavyweight like Jim Mallinson or Mark Singleton. These guys are really, really heroes of mine. And so I've over probably past 5 years now really just been trying to sort of make it happen for myself. And I'm actually in the process now of securing my my British citizenship. My mom's from England, and so I have citizenship through her. And it's my hope actually to go study with Jim at SOAS. And so I'm trying to make all that happen, and all of my sort of studying has been, independent and sort of not down the traditional trajectory. And it can seem like a real challenge to make that happen. So I have a lot of respect for people like you and yoga teachers writ large, and anyone trying to do anything independently. It takes something special inside, Well, I don't know. I guess what it takes has changed over the years, I think, but there is that one, I call them lifers. There's just certain people who they don't kind of have any other choice, and then you sort of figure out a way to make it work. But the avenues are becoming less and less. Although I want to say not necessarily. I think there's other avenues that we just we're not as well familiar with them. But that might take us down a different track than I think we need to be on, because first you you mentioned you're inspired by Jim, and I know you know Seth as well.
Yes.
And I guess that's sort of the intriguing thing. The other thing that one of the other cross sections that was there that you originally reached out is because you are of mixed race. And then you mentioned your father and your grandfather. And I have to say, when I Googled you, the only other thing that pops up is a story about your grandfather and your dad. And they seem to be like quite diametric stories. And then you just started off this conversation by saying you choose to be Frederick because you don't want to be associated with them. So maybe you will say something about them. Why don't you want to be associated with them? Seems like each of them for maybe different reasons.
And I don't know, to be clear, it's not that not that I want to not be associated with them, but a sort of differentiating myself. There's always been some impulse in me for that. And I think part of it from a young age was, having the same name, literally being, the third. And everyone sort of knowing who my grandfather was growing up. So my grandfather is a pretty prominent black figure in the South and in Florida, and particularly in Jacksonville, where I'm from. And so he's a Southern Baptist preacher and senior pastor of his church. I think he has probably over 1,000 members these days. And he's been a pastor my entire life. And so I grew up in that sort of quintessential buckle of the Bible belt Southern Baptist situation. So that sort of strong Christian influence was present for me early in life, and certainly set the ground for my spiritual foundation. And then my dad is a quite different story. So he is, my dad's really kind of hard thing to say. But career criminal. And was a pretty high-profile drug dealer. And when I was in the third or fourth grade, there was a really big sort of FBI operation, and that's probably what comes up. And when you mentioned,
he got busted with the ecstasy pills.
Yeah, man.
Wow. How old were you when that happened?
So I think it was in the third or fourth grade, however old you are then. Maybe, what is that, 8 or 9, something like that. And so he got busted, and that was all over the news. And
do you remember that at age 3 or 4? Like, I don't know how much I remember from age 3 or 4, but do you have memories of it?
Oh, no, not 8. So, I'm sorry, grade 3 or 4.
Oh, yeah. So, so that means you were
9.
8 or 9, yeah.
Yeah.
So you have memories, I'm sure, from that.
Oh, yeah, it was traumatic. And has been the subject of a lot of my own inquiry and healing. And I just remember, my father was already sort of absent from my life. I mean, I would see him on the occasional weekend, and I think he would really try to be present with money.
Were your parents divorced?
Yeah, my story, it's kind of crazy. So my mom's from England, I think I mentioned that, and she immigrated from the UK, and I think at 14 or 15, and then very shortly after she got to America, her and my father got pregnant with me. And so this sort of product of this unplanned teenage pregnancy. And my grandfather, I think, was a really strong influence in my parents getting married before I was born. And I think, they were somewhat in love with each other as well. But so they got married before I was born, and then I think they divorced before I was 1. So I never really knew them together. They would both remarry. My mom would remarry a couple of times, and and then my dad remarried as well. And so I never knew them together. So I had kind of this it was my mom and I for a long time before she and my stepfather got married, which was actually shortly after my dad went to prison. And yeah, so that was a really traumatic thing because, everyone knew about it. And my grandfather, being a public figure, I think he was even the chair of the Economic Development Committee there in Jacksonville as well. So, aside from just being a well-known pastor, he was somewhat of a politician. And I think that added to the already high profile of what my dad had going on. And so it was embarrassing, of course, I think, to my grandfather and family, and to me, and mostly just hurt. And I had only recently, before he had got busted, I had only kind of recently pieced together what he actually did.
Mm-hmm. So you already knew he was up to no good before that happened. It wasn't a complete surprise.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people in that situation, because it's not like he wasn't on the corner, selling bags of weed.
Yeah.
It was he was multimillionaire, and so I never really knew what he did, and I kind of always knew it was something that I couldn't really ask about, or that was probably not legal. And I would always find myself making up stories whenever my friends would ask, what do your parents do, and this and that. I'm like, my dad's I can't talk about it. It's top secret, government, this. I just make up stuff. And then one day, actually, my Mima, so my dad's mother, I asked her one day, and I said, Mima, what does my dad do? And she looked at me and she said, well, what do you think he does? And I said, I'm a pretty smart kid, and I said, I think he's a drug dealer. And I just remember having a big crying session with her then, and that was when when I kind of really realized and put it together. And then it was probably the following year or something that he went off to prison. And spent 10 years there. So.
Wow. He's since released, though.
Yeah, when I was in my freshman year of college, I think, is when he got out.
Wow. So, man, that's crazy. That's a really crazy story. Mm-hmm. And so when your dad goes to prison when you're 8 or 9, is your mom really active in the church? Or?
No. So those have always sort of been separate pieces of my life, which I think is true for a lot of kids who come up in mixed families or divorce situations. Certainly, the truth for a lot of young black men without a father in the home, which is that you get these different pieces of your family which seemingly don't intersect, and that was always true for my mom's side and my dad's. And so she wasn't active in the church, but I would still go with my dad's side of the family on weekends, and that's when I would be with that side. And then for my mom, I think they had already been separate for so long. And I think she was already really living that hardcore sort of single mother, trying to make it happen for me lifestyle that, I think she almost wasn't surprised. I'm sure she knew for longer than I did what was kind of going on with my dad. So it was probably just a matter of time in her mind before he was either, dead or in prison. And I think it definitely brought us closer. We were already super close, having a young mom, a young single mom. And then my stepdad came into the picture not long after that, which is a whole story in and of itself.
Well, I'm curious about, at that time, going to church with the other side of the family.
Yeah.
Were you
a believer, or I mean, I guess yes, that was your faith, right?
Yeah, that's right. And actually, from a young age, I would imitate my grandfather. And so I've always been into books. And whenever I was little, I think my mom has a video of this somewhere of me, like, I would open up the Bible and I would put on a big shirt to like look like my grandfather's preaching robe, and I would pretend like I was preaching. So sort of inclined, to like be this preacher. And I think that the example of my grandfather informed my early spirituality as well. And so certainly was a believer. My grandfather baptized me. And there would be points later on in my life where I thought that's what I was going to do. I thought I was going to be the next preacher of the church. And my grandfather, I think, sort of wanted that as well. He's always had this prayer or sort of notion that one of his sons would be a preacher. And I don't think that was going to happen for my father. Or my uncle, who would sort of be wrapped up in that same world, but actually has since gone back to the church and is actually preaching now as well. But yeah, I was a believer. And then later, sort of high school age, started to confront different pieces of my faith and my belief system. And that's when yoga comes into the picture pretty hardcore as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, you didn't become a preacher. You want to go study Sanskrit and stuff at SOAS. Like that's that's a pretty far leap from a Southern Baptist minister.
Yeah. So
how old were you when you started to question your initial faith?
15, 16, I think, is when I was very clear about the fact that I just didn't identify really as a Christian, and I
had the same exact experience. I was 16 years old, and I was in temple because I grew up with a conservative Jewish household, and I remember there was all these prayers that I knew by heart because I just had learned them since a kid, but I had never read any translations of them. And then I was looking at the prayer book like during the high holy days, and the prayers were happening, and there was translations in this prayer book. And I started reading translations, and I was like, what's this? Like, when I started to ask questions about what it all meant that I had learned, I don't believe any of this. And I remember saying to my dad, I don't believe this. I don't think I'm Jewish. I'm not going to temple anymore. And he said, I'll never forget, he said, I don't either, but your mother does, so you're going. And, in a way, it was okay, because it was like, I didn't have to believe it. It was for my mom, and then okay, I'll do it for her, But definitely around 16 is when I first really questioned the sort of faith I had been brought up in. And so you had that experience too. Do you remember when it started to dawn on you, or why you started to think otherwise?
Yeah, the church. And I think the people, not only just like my grandfather's church, but my mom and my stepdad are pretty devout Christians. And so we would go to I think it was a non-denominational church, and I don't know, man, just the church scene in the South for me, as a young black man, it was like, I was, with my mom and my stepdad's church, it was this like all white church. And then my grandfather's church is all black church. And then just the people, the sort of social behavior wasn't lining up with everything that was being preached. And that just didn't sit well with me. I'm
sorry, forgive me. I don't know a lot about what happens in churches. I've never really been in many of them. So was the Baptist churches, that's like with the singing and everything, it's quite like a commotion, right?
Yeah, commotion. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. There's a deep history within Black culture, very tightly associated with the church. And
I had some folks on, and we talked about the history in terms of yoga too, and the relationship between the Black church. But so you grew up in those churches singing every Sunday.
Yeah, man, singing. I'd even get up and talk sometimes, and it's a very devotional situation, and I think that sort of informed what would become my sort of bhakti, if you will, in the relationship with yoga. But it was.
Was the white church singing like that too, or was that different?
Nah, no, not really. There's a sort of running joke. I feel like in the Black community, sort of about how different the white church experience is from the Black one, and the Black church, is just very soulful and charismatic and loud and in your face and animated, and the white church, at least the ones that I went to, are a little bit more reserved and sort of quiet clapping and rocking back and forth.
Yeah. Wow. But you certainly got lots of, that's what I mean. What an intersection. You get to see both of those cultures firsthand.
Yeah. Yeah. And being half Black, half white myself, I think there was always that trying to reconcile in myself, like, can I be good enough for this group? Am I good enough to be in this group? And what do I really identify with? And that sits right with me and that doesn't, or they judge me this way or they judge me that way.
You said about there's sort of the preaching and there's the ritual and the experience of, the prayer and the community. But then there's also sort of the individual expressions and behaviors of people. Mm-hmm. And I also had a similar experience. I just remember one time being in temple and the rabbi was talking about some kind of, not being attached to material wealth. And like looking around and everybody was wearing these fur coats and diamonds and stuff and showing off all their wealth in the temple, and I was like, this is such bullshit. I just remember thinking there was like a disconnect between the actuality of people's behavior and who they were, and then what we were supposedly all representing by being here in this room together.
Yeah, that was very present for me as well, and black preachers get a bad reputation for this too, is like, they'll be preaching one thing and then they'll have the big, Rolls Royce parked out in the parking lot. Mm-hmm. And I think preachers are at large, but it's an interesting thing when that sort of the practice isn't meeting the preaching or the word, and that conflation, I don't know, doesn't sit well with me. Didn't sit well with me.
Yeah, me neither. And so sometimes when you come up against that, you look for other avenues, don't we?
Yeah.
We look for other ways to delve into ourselves and our spiritual beings that are maybe not so entrenched in dysfunctions or in hypocrisies and yoga for me was that too. It sounds like that was for you. It was sort of very
absolutely
individualized rogue way for me to develop my spirituality or something.
Yeah, absolutely. And so sort of insert yoga right then at 16, 17.
So where does that happen? At 16? It happened for me in college. For you, it happened before college?
Yeah. So, so I would spend a lot of time, like I mentioned, I've always sort of been a book nerd, academic type, and I spent a lot of time studying. It was like just my comfort zone.
What was that about? Was that like
to be in a book?
Was that like your hideaway?
Yeah, it's it's the way I processed sort of being alone, being contemplative. I always found that to be a safe space. And I just liked being really good at school. I was a math and science hardcore geek, and in high school, as things started to get more serious, taking higher level courses for college and that.
I saw that. Sorry to jump in, but I got all these notes here that I made. Like, you competed in swimming and diving. You were a trombone player. You were a mathematics scholar. I was like, wow. Yeah. See, I kept thinking he was trying to be everything his dad wasn't.
Yeah. Oh man, that reminds me of a quote. I think it's in one of Barack Obama's books. He might even be quoting someone else, but he's like, every man in this world is either has this inherent drive to either take his father's place in the world or make up for his father's mistakes. And so I think I have some impulse to make up for the mistakes or sort of be everything that he wasn't, for sure. So I won the mathematics pride award from the head of the math department and all of this stuff.
You were an achiever, huh? You were an achiever at a young age.
Yeah. And so because of that, I spent a lot of time with books. And I remember, and I sort of prided myself on things that seemed really it took a lot to understand them, or that you had to put a lot of effort into knowing something about it to really get it. And so I was inclined to philosophy for that reason, and it was through Eastern philosophy books that I would find out about yoga, and how that sort of seed was planted in my life.
I get that. What you're saying to me, that sounds like it's sort of this process of inquiry is the pleasure.
Yes.
More than like the attainment of knowledge even. It's
right.
I enjoy being in that inquiry and in delving,
Absolutely. And so that's how I was exposed to yoga.
So wait a second. So you're exposed to yoga in books first. Do you remember what the book was?
No, it's funny. I remember what it looks like. There's a green book, and
if you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.